All right. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh to all of you. Dear brothers and sisters, I pray you and your families are well. We're such an honor to have you all with us as usual in our international lecture series. After many years and after a lot of different requests, finally, we're so excited to present to all of you Professor Dr. Yasien Mohamed, who by far is one of the pioneers in the revival of Islamic psychology into our contemporary era. One of the giants in the field, together with Professor Malik Badri, rahimahullah, and other amazing pioneers. Uh, some of his books have been foundational for all of us who are interested in understanding psychology from an Islamic paradigm. So we're very honored and pleased to have Professor Yasien, and I really want to thank you, Professor Yasien, for giving out of your precious time. Today will be our international book launch. We're happy to announce that Professor Yasien, after a lot of years' work, has translated, and he's going to present the book himself, Al-Isfahani's works into English, The Art of Cultivating Noble Character. And these are foundational texts, dear brothers and sisters, in the akhlaq tradition, actually, the Islamic applied ethics, you can say. So we're very delighted and pleased to have Professor Yasien with us today. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. We also want to thank Mufti Mangera from White Thread Press and also from Zamzam Academy for supporting the publishing of this book. And we know the work has been something that has been part of a long journey. So to finally have the honor and opportunity as ISIP, the International Students of Islamic Psychology, to be part of launching this book together with Professor Yasien, Mufti Mangera, and rest of the team is truly an honor. I also want to thank my dear colleagues, Sister Shireen and Sister Nadira, for always helping with all of our initiatives in such an excellent way. I also want to thank Sister Fatima and Sister Mediha, Sister Danny, and rest of our team in ISIP as well for all the back end work that they're doing as well, both in Southern African chapter with Sister Shireen and also with the international lecture series with Sister Nadira, Sister Fatima, Sister Danny, and Sister Mediha. Welcome, brothers and sisters. We'll start by reciting Surah Al-Fatiha as usual in our international lecture series. After that, we will just go through some guidelines with regards to our lectures generally. If you have any questions to Professor Yasien as he will present his book, inshallah, feel free to use the Zoom chat at all times. The Zoom chat is open for questions or reflections, and we will address them to Professor Yasien in the end of the session. After his presentation, inshallah, and we will close with some closing laws and other resources that we will share throughout the session in the Zoom chat. Just the Zoom etiquette as always, dear brothers and sisters. If you guys can have your cameras on, that would be amazing. It's always nice to see the international diversity that we represent as a movement with brothers and sisters all over the world. You can also add the name of your country if you want, just to see, which countries we represent. If you guys are a nomad like myself, write all the countries, if you have the whole world as your home. Nevertheless, no recording or screenshots are allowed, dear brothers and sisters. We will share the recording on ISIP's YouTube channel within a couple of days. And with the permission of Professor Yasien, we will ask him if he would like to share his slides. Then we will email it out to all of you who have registered for the international book launch today, inshallah. Keep muted at all times. Utilize the chat option for any questions or reflections. And if you need any live transcriptions, dear brothers and sisters, feel free to utilize the Zoom application. You can use the live transcription option. Just go to the bottom end of your Zoom application and then you request from it, and then we will give you access to it as well, inshallah. All right, let's go to next slide. A little bit about us as ISIP, the International Students of Islamic Psychology. We try to be an inclusive space designed to connect people with diverse backgrounds interested in the field of Islamic psychology and Muslim mental health. We aim to disseminate knowledge, share resources, and discuss best practices in a free and accessible manner. And we try to be a platform, dear brothers and sisters, where we try to enable further development of people's personal and professional interests, studies, and understanding of Islamic psychology within their communities and countries of origin. And ways that you can connect with us or join our movement, you can join our Islamic Psychology WhatsApp group for resource sharing. Sister Nadira and Sister Shireen will share these links in the Zoom chat throughout the session. You can also become a member of ISIP via our website at www.isip.foundation, where you can get access to our digital library with over 1,000 resources related to Islamic psychology and Muslim mental health. Our YouTube channel is a gem. Hundreds of lectures with some of the leading scholars like Professor Yasien and others, and practitioners of Islamic psychology. Over 10 different languages that we're conducting different lectures. So feel free to benefit from our YouTube channel. The link will be shared in the Zoom chat as well by Sister Shireen and Sister Nadira. And follow us on our different social media handles as well. All right, this is just a QR code for our Islamic Psychology WhatsApp group. And actually, we will share also the link to where you guys can buy Professor Yasien Mohamed's latest book through the White Thread Press. We will share the link to White Thread Press. And once more, we want to thank Mufti Mangera for supporting our book launch today as well, inshallah. So Professor Dr. Yasien Mohamed, without any further ado, I will present him. He's why we're here gathered today. As I mentioned earlier, I consider him to be my own teacher. He is one of the leading scholars in the field, one of the pioneers in the field. And by the way, brothers and sisters, we're doing a tribute to Professor Malik Badri Sunday, the 9th of December at 11:30 a.m. GMT. Every year for the last 4 years as ISIP, we've been trying to celebrate the legacy of Professor Malik Badri. It's now 4 years ago that Professor Badri, rahimullah, passed away. And we consider Professor Dr. Yasien Mohamed to be one of the leading scholars like Professor Malik Badri. So stay tuned for the tribute on the 9th of February. We will announce more information of how you guys can register for the venue through our WhatsApp groups, social media handles, and newsletter. But Professor Dr. Yasien is by far one of the pioneers. He's an Emeritus Professor of Arabic Studies and Islamic Philosophy at the University of Western Cape, South Africa. He holds a Ph.D. in Islamic Ethics from Johann Wolfgang Goethe University in Frankfurt, Germany. His research specializes in classical Islamic philosophy, Islamic psychology, Quranic ethics, and modern Islamic thought as well. And he has authored over 100 peer-reviewed articles in his field of expertise, mashallah. He published many notable books, including the Fiṭrah, the Islamic concept of human nature, and the path to virtue. And we're also happy to announce that we're going to do a 2-series lecture online with Professor Yasien in April, where we're going to speak more about his work with regards to Fiṭrah and how we can understand it from an Islamic psychological point of view. Professor Yasien has been honored with a lot of different prestigious world prizes as well, including the World Prize Book of the Year Award of the Islamic Republic of Iran for his contribution. He also is a renowned person when it comes to scholarly work on, as we mentioned, different fields in Islamic thought, Islamic philosophy, ethics, and he has influenced a lot of people in our field, and also he has studied a lot of the traditional scholars in our tradition as well. And this is the QR code, dear brothers and sisters, to support Professor Yasien's work. You can buy his latest book on the White Thread Press website, and this is the QR code there. We will also share the link in the Zoom chat as well. As I mentioned, our next tribute will be to, our next venue will be tribute to Professor Dr. Malik Badri on Sunday, the 9th of February at 11:30 a.m. GMT. Professor Dareen, Suleiman Dareem, and also the son of Professor Badri, Qasim Badri, will be some of our keynote speakers, and also Professor Rahmatullah Khan as well. And more information will be shared from our on our social media handles. Let me just stop sharing my screen for 1 second. Just want to see if Mufti Mangera is here as well. Mufti, are you here? Mufti were supposed to join us. I'm just seeing in the Zoom. He's not here yet. So Professor Yasien, when Mufti joins, maybe we can invite him to say something as well. I know that he said that he will join. Nevertheless, Professor, we were speaking about Jamaluddin Al-Afghani and the love and appreciation you showed to me and to us. We want to show the same to you. So if you see Jamaluddin Al-Afghani in us, then you are our Imam Ghazali of our time, inshallah. So just the mutual love and respect to you as our teacher and as our mentor. And by the way, dear brothers and sisters, if you guys are from South Africa, ISIP has a South African chapter, and our dear sister, one of our great leaders in ISIP, Sister Shireen, is here. So if you guys want to join that chapter, feel free to reach out. She is doing an amazing job together with the rest of the team. And if you guys are interested in joining any of our other local chapters, we have some of our colleagues here, Sister Fatima, Sister Nadir, and others who will be at your service. We have over 30 chapters all over the world. So without any further ado, let's start presenting Professor Dr. Yasien today. I will share my screen, but round of digital applause. The floor is yours, Professor Yasien. Welcome to the international launch, and thank you for honoring us to launch your book internationally. Rounds of applause. Professor Yasien, you're muted. If you could just unmute yourself, Professor.
Is that okay?
Yeah, that's okay. You're getting a lot of applause and love here, by the way, Professor Yasien. Welcome.
Thank you. So,
shall I share my screen, your slides?
yes, the first slide, please. Yes.
All right, go ahead, Professor Yasien. An honor to have you with us. Go ahead. Do you see the screen?
Yeah, I see something here. The host spotlighted your video for everyone. Unmute your microphone.
Yeah,
So what do I do there?
You don't need to do anything, dear Professor. I think everybody, you're audible, right, brothers and sisters, all of our participants?
Okay.
I think Professor Yasien is audible.
Thank you. Thank you. Yes.
Do you see the screen, Professor Yasien? Do you see the slides?
I can see the screen, yes. Yeah.
Perfect. Go ahead.
Okay, shukran. Thank you very much for the very kind introduction, Brother Sayyid Jamaluddin Miri. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wassalatu wassalam ala ashrafil anbiya wal mursaleen. Wa ala alihi wa ashabi wa tabi'in lahum bi ihsan ila yawmiddin. Respected scholars, brothers and sisters, students, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. First of all, I'd like to thank Sayyid Jamaluddin Miri for inviting me and the ISIP team for hosting this international launch of my book. As you can see from the slide, the title of the book is The Art of Cultivating Noble Character, and it deals with the Makarim al-Akhlaq, which is the virtue ethics. And in Arabic, we call it al-Akhlaq or Ilm al-Akhlaq. And I would venture to say, since you are all students of Islamic psychology, that the essence of Islamic psychology is al-Akhlaq or Islamic virtue ethics. Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala states in the Quran, قَدْ أَفْلَحَ مَنْ زَكَّاهَا, that the successful one is one who purifies his soul. And the purification of the soul, this is actually what ethics is all about. The moral and spiritual purification of the soul and removing the vices of the soul or the nafs. So the Arabic word used in the Quran is nafs, which may be translated as the soul or the psyche. And so I would say that this is actually the same goal of Islamic psychology, is also the goal of Islamic ethics. And the word nafs is very different from the psyche. We can call it the psyche, but it's different from the Western secular psychology concept of psyche, which is not recognizing the transcendent dimension of the soul. So, as you can see, that this topic deals with virtue ethics or akhlaq, and virtue ethics is to do with the kind of person that one wants to become. What are the virtues or the qualities required of a person? It is less concerned with human rights but more concerned about right humans, about nurturing right humans. Now, this idea of virtue ethics started with Aristotle's Nicomachean Ethics, a Greek work which was translated by Ishaq ibn Hunayn in the 9th century into Arabic. And this particular Arabic text had quite an impact on later Islamic philosophers, especially the philosophers of the 11th century. Now, you find that especially after the European Enlightenment, this idea of virtue ethics became less popular because of the idea of scientism and individualism that emerged through the European Enlightenment. And it became somewhat revived since 1981 by Alistair McIntyre, who wrote a book called After Virtue, and which is basically a critique of modern ethics, especially the ontological ethics, which is concerned with rule-based ethics, and we have the utilitarian ethics, which is basically the idea of the ends justifying the means. And to give an example of the utilitarian ethics, you probably are aware of Dostoevsky's work, a Russian work called Crime and Punishment, where there is a character who attempts to, or rather he murders, a elderly Jewish woman on the grounds that she is useless to society, she has a lot of wealth. He can murder her and steal her wealth and then um, use it for his poor family and to pay for his studies at the university. So here you can see a man taking an innocent life for the sake of a greater good, which is to feed his family. So this idea of virtue ethics, uh, it became very prominent, especially in the 11th century, by the Persian philosophers of the time. Especially you find Miskawayh was the first Persian philosopher, Ibn Mishkawayh, who died in 1030. He wrote a book called Tahdhib al-Akhlaq, which is the refinement of character, followed by, of course, he he was very much inspired by Aristotle's ethics because he quotes extensively from Plato and Aristotle, although he tried to bring it within the framework of the Islamic worldview. This was followed by Imam Araghib al-Isfahani, who died around about 1040 after the uh, 1040 of the Christian era. And Isfahani's work was more Quranic based. In every um, paragraph of the work, and this is the work that we have translated that is before us, The Art of Cultivating Noble Character. Every paragraph has Quranic verses. So he's given more of a religious Quranic basis to his ethics. And this is what inspired Imam al-Ghazali, who subsequently, Imam al-Ghazali used to travel with the Kitab al-Dariyah ila Makarim al-Sharia, which is Isfahani's work, which is the means to the noble qualities of the revealed law. And Imam Ghazali subsequently wrote a work called the Mizan al-Amal, which is the scale of action. And this was written in Baghdad in the year 1095. And my research has shown that when we compare the work of Kitab al-Dariyah of Isfahani and the Mizan al-Amal of Imam al-Ghazali, we find great similarities and even identical passages. So, for example, the section dealing with the uh, education of the teacher and the education of the student, um, that whole section, the main points are all taken up by Imam Ghazali in the Mizan al-Amal. Of course, al-Ghazali's style is different. It's much more systematic and very lucid style. And of course, we find subsequently after 1095, Imam al-Ghazali then wrote the Ihya Ulumuddin over a period of 11 years. And 1/3 of the Mizan, the section on education, is taken verbatim from the Mizan into the Ihya, which suggests to me that not everything in the Ihya is a product of Sufi inspiration, but perhaps also many sections of it taken from his works before 1095 through philosophical inspiration. So this is actually the first complete English translation um, of the Kitab al-Dariyah by White Thread Press, and we have to thank Mufti Magera for publishing it. And before this, we
Professor
had,
Yassin, sorry,
yes,
Professor Yassin, sorry, I think Mufti Mangera just joined. I saw his name
yes.
here. So maybe if you want to
So
ask him to say something or
welcome to Mufti Magera, and he may want to comment on the process of the work, the publication. But just to mention that prior to this work, we had the Path to Virtue, which was published in the year 2006. It was basically based on my PhD dissertation that was supervised by Professor Hans Daiber in Frankfurt. And of course, since 2006, well, in the Path to Virtue, there was only one chapter that we translated, compared to this work here by White Thread Press, is the entire 7 chapters from the Kitab al-Dariyah. It took a long time because part of the reason being that it was a very difficult high-level Arabic text of the 11th century and written in poetic style. So we were not able to capture the beauty of the Arabic style, but we focused on transmitting the meaning or the ma'na to convey that to the English readers, to make it comprehensible for modern English readers. If I had to translate it into 11th century English, nobody would have understood it. We had to translate it into contemporary modern English. At this point, if Mufti Mangera wants to say something regarding the publication, he's welcome.
Jazakallah.
Wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Dr. Sab, Jazakallah khair for both you, the host, and everybody as well. I guess you could hear me maybe?
We
Yes,
can hear you.
Yeah, go ahead.
Inshallah. Okay. Alhamdulillah. So, Jazakallah khair to everybody, and mashallah, absolute honor that we were part of this project. And this was based on a meeting that I had with Dr. Saab around 2015 or so. And he mentioned the book then. And with publications, anybody involved in publications know that it's not, every book just takes a very long time. So you plan and you think it's going to be done within, a year or something, and then it takes 3 years, especially if you want to get it right. And we wanted to get this book right. This is too good of a book to get wrong, right? And mashallah, Dr. Saab had done a wonderful job on it. He'd had an editor edited and everything else, but then we had to get it to the White Thread house style as well. We had it edited. I personally went through it. It's a very, very deep book. What really impressed me about this book, and which even before I actually took it on, after having heard about it, I didn't have the courage to take it on at the beginning, and there were different people that were offering to take it on, different publishing houses, some bigger names as well. As far as I know, I'll let Dr. Saab discuss that if he wants to, right? And then finally, mashallah, it was written for us to work on this book. So I thank Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And once we got it, then we always have multiple other topics, multiple other books, and currently we have multiple other books that we're working on. But then eventually we gave this the preference that he needed. And alhamdulillah, we just wanted to make sure that it could be as readable as possible, despite it's so profound. But we wanted it to be accessible to as many people as possible, not just be restricted to some academics, for example, right? And so it's extremely profound, mashallah. What the benefit I've taken from, the benefit that I have taken from reading the book when working on it is just a few things. Number one, it gave me a better understanding of what a human being is supposed to be by design of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has designed a human being in a certain way, certain objective, certain purpose. I think what this book starts off with is about the vicegerency. It speaks about how we're supposed to represent Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala on this earth as such. And then what are the responsibilities based on that? What is our role? I think that's a lot of people miss the role. So they make up their own roles. They make up their own objectives in life. And they don't go according to the objective of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So what this book does is that it tells us what is the role Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has created us for and what he wants us to play. And if we go according to that role, we will be successful. So then what the author then does is that he explains character. He explains the ethics that we're supposed to operate under. And it's absolutely fascinating. I guess he brings to bear much of the knowledge that was there until his time, that he had sifted through and decided what to accept and what to reject. So he brings to bear that, and of course it's affected and influenced so many writers after him. As Dr. Sa was saying, Imam Ghazali and the Ihya Ulumuddin has been profoundly influenced by this book, along with multiple other books. But then strangely enough, he doesn't get the recognition, right? So that's why I think this is amazing khidmah. Multiple aspects regarding the book. I don't want to take too much time because the floor is actually Dr. Saab's and I'm going to let him carry on. Is the other thing that I find very impressive is the way he brings in the Quranic verses. And we've tried to do that in the way we've laid it out. You know, Dr. Saab has tried to do that in terms of trying to show the effortless way in which the author weaves in Quranic verses in his discourse. It's not like many other authors where they say, okay, so let's look at this verse, this is what it says, and they do an analysis. He does that as well sometimes, but mostly what he's doing is he's got a discourse, he's speaking, and suddenly he just puts in a verse there. He puts in a verse as though it's part of his discourse. It's just so effortless. But it's amazing how much inference that he can do. You can tell he really knew the Quran very deeply. He understood the Quran. He understood the main message of the Quran. Because where else are you going to get the purpose of life from if it's not from the Quran and then from the hadith of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam? So mashallah, all of that is quite complicated to put across, right, in another language. But alhamdulillah, Dr. Saab has done a wonderful task, a wonderful job I mean, it was very brave to even embark on this, to be honest. Why? Because it's quite a complex book. It's quite a complex book in the sense that he uses a very, you can say, very nuanced English, very nuanced Arabic, very nuanced terms to show subtle differences between various different ideas. And to be able to put that in English is not easy at all. And then he uses multiple poems to substantiate what he's saying. So we had to, mashallah, put all of this, mashallah, Allah reward Dr. Saab to get all of this, to be brave enough to have even picked this up and then annotate it with multiple annotations, lots of footnotes to try to explain the different aspects. Our job then was to just make sure that it was something that more people could benefit from, right? In terms of the layout and the presentation and then the cover design. And that cover design is also something we worked on for quite a few weeks to get it right. A depiction of what 5th century Isfahan would look like, at least one of the beautiful, beautiful architecture would look like. So that is, that we did get some artificial assistance in that regard, but alhamdulillah, all for the good. So there you go. May Allah reward Dr. Saab and everybody else that assisted in this. May Allah reward our host here, Sayyid Jamaluddin. That's your name, right?
Barakallahu feekum. That's my name.
Okay, now MashaAllah. Okay.
We met in Sweden, by the way, Mufti. I met you 2 years ago here in Sweden, so it's such a joy to meet you again.
Oh, so is that in Malmo?
In Malmo, yes. I met at Sheikh Saluddin's place.
Okay, well, next time, inshallah, look out for you. And
Yeah, we'll connect, inshallah. It's an honor.
we'll have Swedish chocolate together, inshallah.
Inshallah. Looking forward to it, Mufti. Thank you for supporting Professor Yasien's work, Mufti. And by the way, all brothers and sisters here, all esteemed scholars and students of knowledge, Mufti Manguera by himself is one of the great scholars of our time as well. So we're very honored to have you here. Inshallah, we will do something with your work in ISIP as well, inshallah. Thank you for supporting this great work of Professor Yasien, and thank you for the work you're doing for the Ummah. Jazakallah khairan, Mufti.
Okay, barakallah fiqh. Allah bless you all, and we'll see you again sometime. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.
Alaikum. So Mufti, through the White Red Press, has released this book, brothers and sisters. We will share the link for how you guys can buy the book, inshallah, and Sister Nadira will share with all of you, so you can order directly from White Red Press website, inshallah. Jazakallah khair, Mufti. Yes, Professor Yasien, go ahead again. By the way, Isfahan touches my heart as a person with Persian descendants, so alhamdulillah. Nice to see these beautiful layouts. Go ahead, Professor Yasien.
Shukran, Mufti Manguera, for those kind words and explaining the process of publication. I'm really very happy that Mufti Manguera undertook the task of publishing this work because I think it was really professionally done with the quality of the cover and the design and the print. And Alhamdulillah, I'm also happy that you have a publisher that is also a scholar in his own right, and that's what makes me comfortable giving my manuscript to a publisher who's not just a printer that's there to make money, but that is a scholar and values the work himself. So I may proceed on to the next section, and that deals with the biography of Imam Raghib al-Isfahani. I'm sure that many of you are very curious to know now who this Imam al-Isfahani, because we know about Imam al-Ghazali and Miskawayh. Now, who is this Imam al-Ghazali? I'm sorry that I will have to disappoint you. We know absolutely nothing about his life, his personality, his date of birth, or his date of death. But what we do know is that we have his works, the legacy, his intellectual legacy that he left behind. So on the basis of his works, I try to extrapolate some idea of what I imagine his personality to be. So I am imagining that Imam Isfahani must have been a very humble individual, because if you look at his Muhadarat al-Udaba, which is his poetic collection, he makes the statements that I seek refuge in Allah for any sense of pride, and I acknowledge my limitations, and all credit goes to my peers, my scholarly peers. Then also, I imagine him to be a private individual. He was not a public figure like Imam Ghazali was appointed as the professor of Nizamiya University in Baghdad. And Imam Ghazali wrote a biography. We don't have any indications of Imam Isfahani having taken any government position. So he was, I imagine that he just had his few students that he was teaching. So to me, I think Isfahani was perhaps a Zahid, or a person that was detached from the worldliness, although he however, he was somewhat critical of some extreme Sufis who tended to reject the world and not take part in the affairs of the society, because he said that man is madani, that he's a civic or a social being, then he should take part in the development of society. Now, the Imaratul Ard idea, cultivation of the land. And then in terms of his date of death, there's a lot of confusion about that. I have come to the conclusion, and I explained this in the introduction to the translation, that his date of death more or less round about 1040, whereas the classical scholars such as Haji Khalifa give the date of death of 502 Hijrah 1108, which is very close to the date of death of Imam al-Ghazali. However, new research has indicated that Isfahani died at least about half a century before the assumed date of death by both classical and modern scholars. For example, if we look at his mention of the poets that surrounded Sahib ibn Abbas, Sahib ibn Abbad, who lived in 385 Hijrah 995 AD, which is, actually a century before the assumed date. We can see that Isfahani lived in that period. In his Muhadarat, he showed that he had contact with those poets. And then another indication is the Mufradat manuscript, which is his Quranic lexicon. This was written by the scribe in 409 Hijrah, and 409 Hijrah is a very early date. This also gives an indication of the period in which Isfahani lived. Then in terms of whether he was Sunni or Shia, many of the scholars had this idea that they speculated that Isfahani was Shia because he quoted extensively from Imam Ali's sayings. However, if we look at the Kitab al-I'tiqadat, which is Book of Beliefs, he makes it very clear the beliefs of the Ahli Sunnah wal Jama'ah that he identifies with, and he distanced himself from the Mu'tazila and the Shia perspective. We tried to figure out what Kalam orientation was Isfahani. Was he leaning towards the Ash'ari Kalam or the Maturidi Kalam? And I've just made some preliminary findings when looking at his Kitab al-I'tiqadat, which is a book on belief, a book on Kalam. And in fact, it's worth a PhD for someone to do a translation of the work, or a PhD to come to final conclusions. But my preliminary conclusion is that he was predominantly Ash'ari because of two main views: the idea of divine power that prevails over human conduct, that in the Ash'ari view, you acquire through kasb your action, the power of your action through Allah's qadr. You have a limited free will, but ultimately the power comes from Allah. And then the second point is on the question of Iman, that your Iman remains intact, but it fluctuates according to your deeds. If you commit bad deeds, your Iman decreases, and good deeds increase your Iman. That is clearly an Ash'ari perspective. However, we can say he's not a conventional Ash'ari because he also adopts the Maturidi view regarding the intellect or the aql. And regarding the intellect, he said that through the aql, you can determine the universals of good and evil. Because how do you know whether murder is wrong? And you do not need the divine revelation to tell you something which is very common sense. It's a common sense, and common sense is often not very common. But when it comes to the ahkam, or the rulings regarding pork and wine, we need to refer to the Quran and divine revelation to give us clear directives regarding the rulings around pork and wine. But when it comes to the universals of good and evil, the intellect and your human fitrah, your innate intellect, can guide you to apprehend good and evil in that sense. But anyway, that's to do with biography and kalam. Now I want to turn to the actual content of the work itself. And I would like to focus on three main ideas that emerge out of this book. There are many other ideas, but these are just three main ideas. And in the second slide, we can see that we will look at the one idea, and that is the purpose of creation. This is very central to the work, and it appears at the outset of the Kitab al-Dhariya, where Imam al-Ghazali Imam al-Isfahani explains that there are three purposes for creation. The one is the worship, ibadatullah, worship of Allah. Number two, imaratul ard, which is the cultivation of the earth and the building of civilization. And three is khilafatullah. Khilafatullah, according to Isfahani, is of the higher level of our mission in this world, because you require free will and intellect to be able to play the role of Khilafatullah. And he quotes the Quranic verse, he will make you successors in the land. And also another verse, Inni ja'ilun fil ar khalifa, we have made you a khalifa. So this is actually our mission in this world, the telos, and our function as human beings. This is in fact the highest level, and it's Khalifa is basically the rule over our body and the soul, and the rule over our relatives and our citizens. But Imam Isfahani emphasizes that you cannot rule over others unless you have ruled over yourself. So self-governance precedes governance over others, which means self-governance means the purification of self, ethics before politics in that sense. Of course, worship is compulsory, but the purification of the soul is a voluntary act and therefore of a higher level, and it is the prerequisite to be Khalifatullah. You cannot be Khalifatullah without cultivating the virtues of the self. And Imam Isfahani defines Khalifa as such. And I quote, and the quotation is on the slide: the imitation of Allah with humankind's ability to rule by applying the noble virtues of the sacred law, namely wisdom, justice, forbearance, beneficence, and graciousness. The striving of these virtues are for the attainment of paradise and proximity to God. So there's 2 points that arise out of this quotation. And the one is the imitation of Allah, which corresponds with the hadith, تَخَلَّقُوا بِأَخْلَاقِ اللَّهِ, which means that imbue yourselves with divine qualities, such as wisdom, such as compassion. Although Allah's qualities are absolute, and if we try to imitate or emulate those qualities, it can only be at the human relative to our own capacity. Now, this is very powerful. It's a paradigm shift, actually, from the idea of human rights in Western conceptions of ethics to right humans. We shift the focus to nurturing right humans. And for that, we need to cultivate the soul and imitate the divine qualities. And the second purpose is to attain nearness to Allah, which is, taqarrub ilallah, and also eternal happiness. The happiness not only in this world, but also in the year after. So in other words, these virtues that we should strive for, right? These virtues must lead to nearness to Allah and the happiness not only in this world, but also in the year after, Sa'ad al-Ukhrawiyah. So that is actually the telos, whereas in Aristotle's virtue ethics, it is limited to only happiness in this world, which he calls eudaimonia. Now, the second main idea is that of the three faculties of the soul. And can I have the next slide, please? Yes. Now, the three faculties of the soul, there's the rational faculty, which is al-quwwatul fikriyah, which is the intellect, basically. Then we have the concupiscent faculty, al-quwwatul shahwiyah, which is your desire or shahwa. Third is the irascible faculty, which is al-quwwatul ghadabiyah, which is anger or your emotions, ghadab. Now, the balance of these three faculties, the faculty of the intellect, of emotion, and of desire, can be balanced in the soul by the intellect. So if the intellect reigns supreme or dominance over the two lower faculties of the soul, which is desire and anger, then we will have the four cardinal virtues. If desire is moderated, we have temperance. If the emotion is moderated, we have courage. If the intellect is moderated, we have wisdom. And when these three cardinal virtues are, if they are manifest, then we have the fourth virtue, and that is justice. So in other words, justice, wisdom, courage, and temperance are the four cardinal virtues. And if you look at this picture, you see there the horse is a metaphor for desire. That's the bestial character. And the, what you call it, the dog is the predatorial character, which is your emotions when it is, when the intellect is subordinate to these lower desires, then the vices emerge, like in the case of emotions turning, to the extreme. Then you have a predatorial character, a character that is destructive and manipulative. Now, we want to then move on to the next main idea, and that is the external goods. Now, Aristotle wrote very extensively in the Nicomachean Ethics about the external goods and what are some of the external goods, like wealth, for example, external to the self, not internal to the soul. So, for example, wealth is an external virtue, friends are external virtues, your status and your stature, these are external virtues. But the point being made here is that we have it in Aristotle as well, that these external goods can be supportive for the nurturing of character and developing the four cardinal virtues. So for Imam al-Isfahani, wealth, for example, can be destructive, but it can also be constructive and supportive towards the soul. The wealth must become the khadim, the servant of the soul, and not the soul, the servant of wealth. So I will just, if you don't mind, on page 131, there's a quote in Kitab al-Dhariya and concerning wealth. It says, external acquisitions such as wealth and rank are middle goods, since they can lead a person either to virtue or to vice, depending on whether or not their use is directed by reason. If the intellect directs their use, they will lead to virtue, but if directed by ignorance, they will lead to evil. For this reason, Allah warns that man's possessions and children are surely a temptation. That is Surah 64, verse 15. If one is asked what is goodness, one can say absolute goodness is chosen for its own sake, while other goods are chosen in support of it. And every intelligent person, without exception, yearns for this absolute good, which is paradise. All those external goods, including the lowest good, which is wealth, can contribute to the absolute good, which is the eternal happiness of paradise. but it is not a good for the one who amasses wealth and counts, thinking that his wealth will make him immortal. And that's from Surah 104, number 3, يَحْسَبُ أَنَّ مَالَهُ أَخْلَدَ. That the wealth is destructive for the one who thinks that this wealth will make him immortal, but it can be supportive if it is used with wisdom and in moderation. Now, I want to the last section of this talk, I want to cover just 3 main principles that guide moral conduct according to Imam Raghib al-Isfahani. And the first, can I have the next slide, please? Yes. So now, you see there, this is another slide. You see that what you think this individual on the horse, what is he trying to do? He could be hunting, or he could be in the process of jihad and to reach the final goal, but he has to control his horse and his dog. The dog, as we said, represents the tendency for irascible emotion, the overzealous without wisdom, and patience if not guided by its master. So this is the dog, and it represents the anger within the human being. The horse represents the desire, as we mentioned, that if the master hasn't got control over the horse, then he could move off the path. And then the human being, which is the rider, is the intellect. The intellect guides the horse to his destination. So now we want to focus more on the dog, or the metaphor of emotion in the dog. And of course, you know, the external goods we spoke about, the spear or the saddle, could be regarded as the external goods. But we're looking at the principle of emotion, which is the irascible faculty. Remember, we said there are 3 faculties of the soul, and the faculty of anger is one of them. So emotion is something not to be suppressed in Islam, but to be regulated. So if you regulate the emotion of anger, right, and if it's guided by the intellect, then we get the virtue of courage and patience. So you find, for example, what other emotions are there besides anger? We have fear, we have sorrow. These are all interchangeable emotions. And Allah states in the Quran, وَلَنَبْلُوَنَّكُمْ بِشَيْءٍ مِنَ الْخَوْفِ, that we will test you with some fear. And fear is a very important mechanism in the human being for survival. You know, just in the modern century, you find a German physician discovered in the 1930s the amygdala, which is the fear center of the brain. And here Allah mentions this in the Quran 15 centuries ago, that we will test you with some fear. Why some fear? Because no fear is impossible. You cannot survive without fear. If the lion approaches you, you will run away. So it is a defense mechanism. And so emotions are, and Allah tests us by these emotions of how we regulate it. If there's loss of life and any kind of musibah or calamity, then we are required to adopt patience or sabr in those cases. And Yaqub alayhi salam is an example of sabr, because when his son Yusuf alayhi salam disappeared, he was in a state of fear and sorrow for the loss of his son, because the son was very dear to him. But it was not just a emotional, sentimental connection with the son. It had a deep spiritual connection, but there's no time to elaborate on that. And Yusuf, Yaqub alayhi salam demonstrated with iman, or with faith, and with sabr, that he was able to bear the loss of his son. I mean, he became very blind because of sadness. Now, you must have heard of Daniel Goleman. Daniel Goleman wrote a book called Emotional Intelligence. And the publishers indicate on the cover of the book that this is a groundbreaking work. But it's not actually groundbreaking, because um, we've had this among the classical philosophers in the Greek and the Islamic tradition. Um, and so now, when we look at the metaphor of the dog, as I mentioned, the dog is different from the horse. It has got very sharp senses, and it's an important animal that can protect the master. But the master has to be prudent and wise in the way he disciplines the dog. Similarly, your emotions, such as anger, you have to use your reason or your intellect to discipline these emotions so that they can work in support of controlling desire. Remember that the intellect is there to control your desire and your anger. But the anger is something which the newborn child is born with their desire, the instinct. But as we grow older, we develop emotions such as anger, and we develop the powers of reasoning. So anger is something that, or emotions, has the capacity to understand the intellect. So you can change your emotions by changing your perception, how your intellect perceives things. So, for example, in one anecdote, an elegant lady, very smartly dressed with beautiful, pretty shoes, walks into a supermarket, and she buys groceries like tomatoes and eggs and these things. And a man comes into the supermarket and bumps into this lady, and all her clothes are stained by the groceries falling onto her. And she takes the umbrella and knocks this man on the head, and says, "Are you blind? Can't you see where you're walking?" And then the man struggles to get up, and then she realizes that he is actually blind. And when she realizes this through her intellect, she then shifts from anger to compassion. Her emotions suddenly shifts from anger to compassion. And then another example is a man who suffered from sorrow or depression. His wife died, and he approached a psychologist, Viktor Frankl, who wrote a work called Man in Search of Meaning. And Viktor Frankl said to the man, "You are feeling depressed because you lost your wife. Now imagine if you died before your wife. How would your wife have felt? Would she have been depressed, since you've been very close and married for many years?" So he said, yes, no, she would have been depressed. So he said to her, now by you going through the sorrow on account of the loss of your wife, you are saving your wife of suffering. And so when he put it in that way to the patient felt that sense of meaning in his suffering or in his sorrow, and he was able to bear it in a better way. That shows how your emotions can change according to your intellect. The second principle is the principle of moderation. So when it comes to uh, what you call it, your virtue, you have the virtue is the mean. For example, courage. Courage is the mean between recklessness or cowardice, all right? And generosity is the mean between two extremes. What is the opposite of generosity, Brother Jamaluddin? Can you tell me the opposite of generosity?
To be cheap, to be quite, yeah, non-generous. Yeah,
Non-generous, to be cheap, to be stingy,
be
right?
stingy. Yeah,
Miserly, yes. And now
absolutely.
there's another extreme of generosity.
Is that?
Can anyone?
Yeah, yeah.
And that
Please.
is
Yeah.
the other extreme is that of being over generous without having prudence or wisdom in your generosity. So I'll give an example of that. There's a French novel written by Balzac called Father Goriot. Father Goriot had two daughters. He was a wealthy, retired gentleman that lived in a very modest lodging, and the daughters used to come to visit him frequently because they wanted to live a bourgeois lifestyle. They came to him for money, and every time he gives them money. The day his money was depleted, he lived like a pauper, and they stopped visiting the father. And the day he died, they were too busy to attend his funeral. There was just one person who buried him. So here's an example of over generosity, not using wisdom and spoiling his daughters. Something like King Lear as well. The third one is that of the principle of habituation. And this is the last point, last key principle. Now, the habituation is the key to character. You must have heard of the book Atomic Habits. It's now very popular nowadays, but I mean, this idea is an ancient idea of with habit and practice, you perfect your skill. Similarly, you can perfect your character through habituation. And Imam al-Isfahani defines character as a human state that triggers moral action without thought and deliberation, which means when you perform that action of generosity, it is done with spontaneity, without deliberation or hesitation. In other words, if we say Jamaluddin is a generous man, he is generous because it comes naturally to him. You follow? And now, how do you acquire this habit? If you repeat a particular action, right, it becomes natural to you. For example, how do you learn calligraphy? If you are a novice, you go to the calligraphy teacher. It teaches you to write the alif or the ba, alif from top to bottom and the ba from right to left. The novice will do it consciously and, with full deliberation. But when the calligrapher says, look, this weekend, I want you to write 1,000 times your alif, after this repetition, it becomes natural to you, spontaneous. It comes spontaneously from the soul. Now, similarly, when you do the dhikr and you recite Allah's divine names, Ya Kareem, O generous one, O generous one, which is excellent and which we must do to repeat the names of Allah. But at the same time, we need to put this into practice, that the Quranic verses, we have to recite it. We have it goes through three stages. The first stage is the reciting of it with tajweed, which is pronunciation. Then tafakkur, the contemplation and understanding of it. And then the amal, which is the practice. And therefore, Allah says in the Quran, concerning the Quran, يَتْلُونَهُ حَقَّ تِلَاوَتِهِ, that they recite the Quran with the full justice of its recitation, and that justice is on three levels: on the sensory level of tajweed, on the cognitive level of tafakkur and reflection, and on the level of amal, which is your practice. So the ultimate aim of the practice of the divine names and the imitation of these divine names, the khalaqu bi akhlaqillah, is the knowledge of Allah, which is ma'rifah, and the happiness in this world and in the year after. So therefore, to conclude, I'd like to say that in this modern world, there is too much of focus on human rights at the expense of right humans. And this book is an attempt to redress the imbalance in the modern world. And inshallah, we make dua that it will benefit the readers both in knowledge and in practice, and it will contribute to the revival of the intellectual legacy of Imam Raghib al-Isfahani. Shukran. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Round of applause to our dear Sheikh, Professor Dr. Yasien, for this amazing presentation of this works of Imam Isfahani. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala really grant you tawfiq in your scholarly work, Professor, to revive these traditional manuscripts into our contemporary era as a way for us as students or practitioners or scholars of Islamic psychology to benefit from is really, really important indeed. So, dear brothers and sisters, please round of applause to our Sheikh, to our teacher, Professor Yasien. Professor Yasien, thank you. It was very interesting the connection you did to the notion of golden mean and moderation. Also, the whole analogy of the horse, the dog, and the intellect, and the whole approach that we have read in the works of Imam Ghazali to also see that connection to Imam Isfahani. Actually, one thing that you said, and there are a couple of questions from our beloved, scholars, students, and practitioners and participants in the chat that we will address, brothers and sisters. But one thing that came to my mind, you said something very interesting, Professor, with regards to extreme. Even a virtue can become extreme on the other end, right? So you were speaking about over generosity, right? And it reminded me of. So I am from the Ahl Sunnah of Iran, by the way, and so I'm Persian. I'm Persian Turk Arab in my lineage, but yeah, we speak Farsi in my home. We have a tradition in the Persian and culture sphere. We call it Ta'aruf, which is not the Arabic Ta'aruf, even though it has the same root meaning of, in a sense, introducing,
Taraf, yeah.
right?
Yeah.
But ta'aruf is actually a social practice that is extreme politeness. I love it, by the way, but sometimes it can be almost too extreme. So when you were speaking about overgenerosity, dear professor, I was thinking about that even things that are beautiful can come to a point where it becomes extreme, where it loses its meaning. So my question to you, professor, is when do we know when it's too extreme? And when do we know that it's even a virtue can become too extreme? And did Imam Isfahani in his work refer to this or reflect upon this?
Yes. Well, you see, the work of Kitab al-Dariya is actually a blueprint of akhlaq. In other words, it's the basic plan. It's like the Mizan al-Amal of Imam al-Ghazali. It gives you a blueprint, right? But the blueprint must be followed by, it gives you some guidelines of how to nurture character, how to moderate your qualities, that it doesn't go to the extreme. And but we find that in the Ihya Ulumuddin is a good example of how you can work in detail, gives you detailed guidance of how to work on, say, problem of arrogance, kibr. That's extreme. Imam Ghazali had that problem. The problem of the intellect going to its extreme, the sense of pride in your knowledge, of fame. And, Imam Ghazali, if I may give this example of how Imam Ghazali, how he tried to overcome this extreme arrogance and pride within himself for his intellectual achievements. He describes in the Mizan al-Amal that he met a Sufi sheikh and he told the Sufi sheikh that he is in a tremendous crisis. He feels that he will end up in hell, Jahannam. And he wanted to know, how can I curb my pride of my intellect? Should I recite more Quran? And the Sufi sheikh said, no, that is not going to help in your case, because you find reciting of Quran is a verbal, it's a verbal expression. And as we have said, يَتْلُونَهُ حَقَّ تِلَاوَتِهِ, that it's not a matter of only reciting at the level of tajweed, but one has to implement the meaning of those verses. And so the Sufi Sheikh told Imam Ghazali that you need to leave your job as Professor of Baghdad, and you need to leave the city and practice zuhd. Zuhd means asceticism or complete detachment from the dunya. So when you have a vice that is in its extreme form, when you have a vice that is in its extreme form, then you have to do something extreme to overcome that. It's not enough just to say make dua and make dhikr and so many thousand times we recite, so it must be followed with action. And this is where this is where Imam Isfahani also emphasized the question of amal and the question of habituation. You cannot develop any good habits without habituation. So I don't know. I mean, I don't know if I answered your question, but that's just what came to my mind.
MashaAllah, may Allah bless you. That was a great answer, Professor. And I agree, habituation. It's just very interesting because sometimes, Professor, when we speak about vices, we tend to forget that virtues can become vices if they're not moderated in a sense. So, and the
Absolutely.
habituation and to do the opposite, the mukhalafa is very important indeed when we have something that is a character flaw indeed. Jazakallah khairan, Professor. We have a couple of questions, dear Professor.
Yes, yes.
Brother
Yes.
Zuraimi, our beloved brother from Singapore. Assalamu alaikum, Brother Zuraimi. Nice to see you. He is asking, subhanAllah, such an amazing kitab in the contemporary context. Nonetheless, why the etymology of vicegerent or khalifa is prevalent in our noble Quran, but was never revealed in the predecessor of the other Abrahamic scriptures? That's a question.
Okay. Well, I cannot give you an answer to that question. Why why we don't have the etymology of Khalifa? I don't think it's important to have the term Khalifa necessarily. Although we have it in the Quran, I'm not sure about the previous scriptures whether they have it or not. But if you find that the previous scriptures they came with one message, all the prophets, as mentioned in previous scriptures, came with one message, and that is the message of Tawheed. And through the message of Tawheed, that implies obedience to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, which is, of course, ibadah, and which is the fundamental message in all the scriptures of submission. But at the same time, because, I mean, if you look at in the Quran, Alastu bi Rabbikum, am I not your Lord? And we replied before creation, never mind before the scriptures, yes, indeed you are our Lord, that we will submit to you. But apart from that submission to Tawheed, the prophets came also as leaders of the society. They came to transform society. And therefore, they were moral examples for us to follow, which means that is actually the role of Khalifa. The role of Khalifa is to take on leadership responsibility for the transformation of society, because Islam is not, just rituals or reciting, but it is meant for transformation of society as such, and not just for one's own personal benefit. And so I think Khalifatullah is actually, it is shared in all the scriptures, maybe not in terms of the term, but in terms of the function of the prophets. And the Prophet ﷺ said that he came, فَإِنَّمَا بُعِثْتُ لِأُتَمِّمَ مَكَارِمَ الْأَخْلَاقِ, that I came to perfect human character, because, and I'm sure that is also the same mission of all the prophets. And the human character is, of course, not just about being feeling good or being good from within oneself or being just towards oneself, but also just towards others as well. The rule over the self, the basic message here is the intellect must reign supreme over your lower desires.
Mm,
As a prerequisite for that human being with that intellect to have just supremacy over the rule of others. There cannot be justice of the society without the justice of the self. Inna Allah la yughayru ma biqawmin hatta yughayru ma bi anfusihim. That Allah does not change the condition of a people, of society, until they change themselves. So it's about leadership, yes. Over the society, we are shepherds. Over our flock, we have a responsibility. The father has a responsibility over his children. The leader has a responsibility over society. But with that responsibility, we are not Khalifa, how can I put it to you, automatically. We are potentially Khalifa because of our humanity, or because of our intellect, because of our free will. This enables us to be Khalifatullah, right? But we have to earn that particular station or that particular status of Khalifatullah. It's not a given. It's not a given. The potential is given, but the actualization of it requires our action and our amal. I hope that will explain it.
MashaAllah, that was beautiful explained, Professor Yassin. Thank you so much. A lot of questions, brothers and sisters. We'll try to go through some of them. We have from Brother Abdullah, perhaps a question in relation. Can one repeat divine names like the genitus without the permission of a sheikh? Yeah, that's his question, Brother Abdullah. What do you say, Professor?
Can you repeat the divine names?
Like the genitus. So can one repeat divine names like the genitus without the permission of a sheikh? Question from Brother Abdullah.
Without the permission of the sheikh. Uh, yes, you can. Yes,
You can.
yes.
Jazakallah
The
khairan.
sheikh is there to guide. The sheikh has to be a model of moral example, and within the framework of the Sharia, the true Sufi sheikh uh, has to be exemplary before they can guide others. And if they are not exemplary in terms of the Sharia as the framework, then we have a problem. Then there will be a problem. Yes. Um, we must be very careful of a cultish kind of uh, mindset. Because if there's a cultish mindset, not just in Sufism, but in any group, political groups, social groups, religious groups, then what that does, when you worship the sheikh, and the sheikh starts becoming the, the intellect starts becoming arrogant, and they start arrogate to themselves certain qualities, superior qualities, and people follow them blindly without the intellect. And I think that we must always maintain our intellect, our soberness and serenity. Otherwise, it leads to fanaticism, because Islam teaches moderation, not fanaticism, not the zeal of fanaticism. Because Allah says in the Quran, the zeal, hamiyatul jahiliyyah, the zeal of the jahiliyyah, where people, they follow the leaders of their tribes blindly. And you just say something negative about the leader and they will kill you, and we have wars and so on. So tolerance is very important, I anything, but may I drift from the question? I mean, it's a simple question and it requires just a simple answer, I suppose. You can extol the divine names without the permission of the Sheikh. You can.
I think it's an important answer that you gave, like beyond just answering the question yes or no, it's something more profound, and it's also which type of guidance do we give, from which source do we get guidance? You know, what is it for sanad, silsila, chain of transmission when it comes to the knowledge that we acquire from our teachers, from the shuyukh, and as you say, also the shuyukh are a reflection of that high maqam of character that they in themselves have been refining throughout their lives, and then they pass it on as being a tarbiyah sheikh, for instance. So that's amazing answer, Professor. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Oh, our beloved brother Mohammed Al-Gindi, mashallah, your son's friend in Egypt, by the way. Our beloved brother,
mashallah.
asking a question here.
Brother Muhammad.
Yes. Yeah, we miss him. We love him. He's an amazing brother. He did a lecture for us a couple of months ago. Amazing lectures. One a great scholar himself. He's asking a question, our beloved brother Muhammad. Many thanks for the amazing presentation. You talked about the noble character of Imam al-Isfahani. Can you tell us how the difference between theoretical and realist tahqiq, writing about ethics, is there a point to compare pre-modern or modern writings on ethics, such as McIntyre, to al-Isfahani and others?
I think there's probably two questions in that one question. The first part is about the theoretical and the tahqiqi approach to ethics.
Yes, exactly. That's the first question.
Yeah. That first part, you find that if we look at Miskawayh, Ibn Miskawayh, the Persian ethicist of the 11th century, who wrote Tahdib al-Akhlaq, his approach to ethics is very theoretical and philosophical because he was inspired by Plato and Aristotle, although he's given a sort of a framework of telos, of happiness, in the year after as well. However, you do not see the sense of tahqiq coming through the work of Miskawayh, because I think his mission or his text is primarily transmission of the philosophical ethics, right? Then when you move to Isfahani, we evolve to another level of ethics, and that is the Quranic-based ethics, right? Guided by Quranic teachings and bringing it within that framework. Then when we evolve further, we come to Imam al-Ghazali, we have the Ihya Ulumuddin, right? In fact, his Mizan al-Amal is also a theoretical philosophical ethics, which is more akin to the ethics of Miskawayh is probably more akin to what McIntyre would refer to in terms of Aristotle's ethics, right? With some flavor, Islamic flavor to it, some bit of Islamization here and there. But the real transformation of the inner self, of the nafs, and going beyond the blueprint, which is the manual for transformation, is the Ihya Ulumuddin. And why is that the manual that will bring about the tahqiq? Look, because Imam al-Ghazali himself went through that process of moral spiritual transformation over 11 years. And then he was a true muhaqqiq, and then he wrote the Ihya Ulumuddin. But it's written in a style that's not purely philosophical, but the style reaches out to all people because he starts off with the Quran, then he quotes hadith, then he gives you anecdotes of the Sahaba, then he gives you some philosophical insight, and he gives you some stories, and then he explains the deeper meanings of certain actions. How can you overcome hasad or jealousy? How can you overcome certain vices? So it's different from McIntyre, I would say, in that it is not purely theoretical. Although McIntyre was important It's an important critique of modern ethics, the deontological and the utilitarian ethics. I think that is the main contribution of McIntyre to say, let us revive virtue ethics, whether he's going to do it within the Christian context of St. Thomas Aquinas, or whether you're going to do it in the Islamic context of Imam Ghazali or Imam al-Isfahani. The main point of McIntyre is his critique so that we can move beyond pure human rights and move towards nurturing human beings. I think every Muslim should read, every Muslim thinker should read McIntyre's After Virtue, because then we have a good sense of the shortcomings of contemporary ethics. Because you'll find that before McIntyre, there was a scholar by the name of Sheikh Ahmed Amin, Al-Azhar Sheikh. He read the works, the British ethics of utilitarian ethics of John Stuart Mill, you know, the idea that the greatest happiness gives the greatest happiness, you know, is what we must aim for the majority, and the means, you know, the ends justifies the means. So in Ahmed Amin, he absorbs he absorbs utilitarian ethics in his book Kitab al-Akhlaq, and he taught that at the Al-Azhar, and it was a work of, essentially a work of utilitarian ethics. But I'm sure if he had to read McIntyre before, he would have been more critical, or if McIntyre's work was translated into Arabic, and I don't think it is translated. And what I find about many of our Western scholars who live in the West and who study in the West, and if they do a critique of Western thought, it is something we must take seriously.
Jazakallah khairan, Professor Yasien, for your excellent answer. Thank you for the great question, Brother Mohammed. We're over time, Professor Yasien. We're mindful of your time. You've been so generous giving out of your precious time. I know you have other obligations. You're celebrating great news of your family as well. So may Allah subhanahu
Yes,
wa
inshallah.
ta'ala, your family members. The last question, with your permission, Professor, is it okay?
That's fine.
All right, Jazakallah khairan. So we have a last question. There's a couple of questions more here. So please forgive us, dear brothers and sisters. Your questions are filled with insight. So hopefully we will have more sessions with Professor Yasien. I'm happy to announce that in April we will do a two-series program with Professor Yasien speaking about his book in Fiṭrah and his scholarly work about Fiṭrah. Inshallah, we're looking forward to it. So this question is from Sister Fatima, who's also one of the co-founders of ISIP, one of our great colleagues and leaders. She is asking Professor Yasien, when Imam al-Isfahani is using the intellect, he is referring to reasoning to govern the emotions, question mark. So if that is the function of the intellect, it is also being used it is also being used interchangeably with the qalb, in that when someone has their intellect governing their emotions, they are working with qalbun salim. Or how is Imam Isfahani explaining this?
Yes, when Imam al-Isfahani talks about the intellect, and he actually wrote one entire chapter in the Kitab al-Tariya of 100 pages, Arabic pages, on the aql. And I haven't seen something like this of 100 pages just on the aql in Imam al-Ghazali. I've seen it in Imam al-Isfahani, and he's giving tremendous emphasis to the aql. But for him, the aql is not just pure discursive reason. It's not just logic. He makes a distinction between al-aql al-tab'i and al-aql al-muktasab. You have the innate intellect and you have the acquired intellect. And the innate intellect corresponds with the fitrah, which means that you have the natural propensity for the cognition of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, your fitrah. You have the intuitive sense of Allah, of Tawheed. And then the aql al-muktasab, of course, that is something which you acquire, through education. And of course, then he also makes the distinction between logic. He discusses all these terms and ma'rifah. And ma'rifah is, of course, not pure logic, but it is a higher level of the intellect. So aql can, at the level of ma'rifah, which is the experiential knowledge of God, ma'rifah, and not a theoretical knowledge, is based on the transformation of the self, on building of moral character, and turning to the divine qualities, right? And practicing the divine qualities. And this is where you attain ma'rifah, experiential knowledge of God. And the Sufis are very strong in promoting that level of knowledge, because it's not a matter of just doing the rituals like prayer and so on, but it's about the inner transformation. And yes, so definitely, to answer the question in simple terms, the aql is not just pure logic. It can be used synonymously with 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 uh, with uh, with qalb. And the qalb is, of course, the medium of navigating between the nafs and the ruh. And in Islamic psychology, it's very important to make the distinction between the nafs, which is the soul, or the self, or the psyche, and the ruh is the divine spirit, is the spirit with a capital S. So modern psychology does not acknowledge the ruh. They do not acknowledge the spirit. They do acknowledge the psyche. Even Carl Jung acknowledges the psyche, and he calls it the soul. But the meaning of the soul is not the ruh. It is the psyche. So we also accept the word psyche or the nafs, but in the Islamic understanding, the psyche or the nafs has a transcendent dimension. In other words, we can go beyond the purely psychological level towards a higher spiritual level, towards ruh, towards God, towards Tawheed. And that is, of course, the ultimate purpose of the building of character, in order to transform that nafs, so that the nafs can be connected to the ruh, and the total human being connected to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and eventually to attain the happiness in this world and in the year after. Shukran.
Shukran jazeelan, jazakallah khairan. That was like a final like punchline, Professor. That was great.
Yes,
So we should call it
absolutely.
ilm al-ruh. We shouldn't call it ilm al-nafs. Should we call it ilm al-ruh? Then with the science, should it be called ilm al-ruh or ilm al-nafs?
No, 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 we should not. We should not. Because Allah says, Allah says in the Quran, um, and we have not given you knowledge of the ruh. يسألونك عن الروح وما أعطيتم من العلم إلا قليلا. We have not given you much knowledge of it, only قليلا. So, according to that verse, in my opinion, let's leave the ruh alone. Let's not tamper with the ruh.
MashaAllah.
Leave the ruh for what it is, coming from the divine source. Let's not tamper with it.
MashaAllah.
We tamper with the nafs. The nafs is our basic material that we file and that we polish and that we shine so that it reflects the ruh.
MashaAllah. That's such an amazing answer, and that's exactly why our tradition is sacred, isn't it? We don't touch the things that we shouldn't touch. We only touch the things that we should touch. And that's why it makes even more sense, even though it already made sense, why we differentiate the nafs with the ruh, and why our scholars in the past didn't speak much about the ruh. It was just an acceptance there. Rather, as you say, rightfully so, the nafs, the soul. And I guess I don't know if you read the book of Mark Texter, professor. He wrote a book called Psychology Without the Soul, How Western Psychology Became the Psychology of Cognitions and Behavior Inclinations. I'm wondering if
No,
we,
I have not known.
it's an amazing book. I
Yeah.
really recommend you and all other of our brothers and sisters in the lecture today to read it. Essentially, I'm wondering sometimes, and please, if you can guide us as students of Islamic psychology, students of Islamic thought, and also many of us mental health professionals, the nafs. I know it means soul. I know it means, sometimes it's used like, behavior inclinations, the ego, the self. The soul, just briefly before we end, if it's possible, the soul, like understanding the soul. I think sometimes people interchange that with, for instance, the psyche or the ruh, with good intentions, but it's still yani error. How can we differentiate the soul with the spirit? How can we differentiate that? Because sometimes in popular psychology, it's
Yeah.
referred to as one.
Yeah. In in um, in Western psychology, they fuse the soul with the spirit, and by fusing the soul with the spirit, they confuse these two terms and make it one. In Islamic psychology, these are two separate identities, that of the ruh and that of the nafs. Now, the nafs has got three levels. We have the nafs al-amara, which is your basic instincts, like the id. Then we have the nafs al-lawama, which is the blaming self. Nafs al-amara is the commanding self, bisu, towards evil. That is the lowest level. Then the nafs al-lawama is the blaming self, the self that blames itself. When you do something wrong, you feel a sense of conscience. It is basically your conscience. And then the nafs al-mutma'inna is the highest level, which means the tranquil self when you attain the ultimate happiness. So the whole purpose of life is to work on these levels of nafs to come to the level of the tranquil self. But I think for Islamic psychologists, the main, I think the main level is that the nafs al-lawama, because as Muslims, we're always in that state of nafs al-lawama. We do something wrong, then we feel bad about it. Because we have a bit of conscience. We believe in divine. We believe in our scriptures. We know what is right and what is wrong. So we have a certain sense of conscience when we deviate from that path. So the point is that I prefer to use the word nafs. And if I translate it, then I will use the word soul in my translation slash psyche. But I don't like the word psyche that much because psyche connotes the idea of psychological, whereas soul, the lower soul and the higher soul, it gives you a sense of this progression,
Yeah.
moving from the unconscious instinctive level to a higher level of conscience, to a higher level of superior spiritual consciousness. There's a spiritual progression. Whereas the Western view of the soul is very reductionistic, you know? It's like
Mm.
psychiatry is even worse. It reduces everyone to chemicals,
Yeah, yeah.
that we are just, the problem is the chemical imbalance in the brain. And that's what they say. But there's no scientific yardstick to measure the chemical balance in the brain. But that's psychiatry. Psychology is concerned with psychotherapy. But often psychology is also tending towards the chemical model. It's
Yeah.
tending towards the medical model. So what we do need is we need a combination of the different approaches. There's the medical, there's the psychological, and there's the ethical and spiritual. So my talk and this book is to focus more on the ethical and spiritual side for the transformation of the nafs. And this is, in fact, what distinguishes Islamic psychology from Western psychology.
SubhanAllah. SubhanAllah.
That's
SubhanAllah.
exactly where the difference lies. But now the question is, what in Western psychology can we incorporate in terms of therapies?
Yeah,
And how can these therapies, right, be weaved into an Islamic framework without being reductionistic?
yeah,
Because Western psychology is so reductionistic. It reduces you to just a bundle of chemicals or
yeah,
just psychological subconscious instincts and traumas.
yeah,
But how can we rise above that?
yeah,
That is the question.
yeah. We want to learn more from you, Professor. Please come back soon because we enjoyed. I think I speak on behalf of all of our participants and all of our colleagues and all of our members. We really enjoyed it. You have so much deep knowledge that we all will benefit from. After 4 or 5 years, finally we made it happen, Professor Yasien. So
Inshallah.
round of
Forgive
applause
me
to
for
our
my
dear Sheikh.
shortcomings.
No,
Yeah,
yeah.
forgive me for my shortcomings. And sorry, we couldn't answer all the questions.
Jazakallah khairan, Sheikh. Now, wallahi, please forgive us for any shortcomings. Please forgive me. And brothers and sisters, we're going to have a 2 series lecture with Professor Yasien in April about the Fiṭrah. Inshallah, we will inform all of you. Inshallah, more information will come soon. Actually, Professor, we've been conducting a lot of lectures. This is the first time I feel like, at least, that I mean, all of our scholars are amazing. But one thing that really you explained in such an amazing way. I mean, we know the difference between spirit and soul, but now I finally understood like the Western psychology can accept the soul, of course, from a very reductionistic point of view, but they never
Yes.
speak about the spirit. Even in our native languages, like I speak Swedish, ande is spirit. That's really nothing that they speak about, even in positive psychology, where they want to accept like some form of, transcendental theories or stuff. So it's so like it's like, it's so on point what you're saying. Like they don't want to touch it. And often I think it's the fear of the Judeo-Christian tradition because they're so traumatized by the Judeo-Christian tradition in the West in particular. And the spirit is so much connected, at least in the Western context, to the Judeo-Christian notion of it rather than the Islamic notion that we have. So every time you speak about spirit or ande, it's like theology and it's Christianity and it's not psychology. So even the soul, it's accepted, of course, in a very reductionistic way. So you mentioned this in such a thorough and excellent way, Professor Yasien. Thank you so much for enlightening all of us. I speak from the behalf of the
Yes.
ISIP, the International
Sorry,
Institute of
just
Islamic Psychology, that
on
we
that point,
appreciate
yeah.
everything.
Sorry, the word zeal, the German word
Zeal.
zeal. The
Yes,
German word zeal, right? It means the soul.
yeah,
And Carl Jung uses that word,
yeah, yeah,
zeal.
yeah, yeah,
But they employing Christian theological terminology in German, and they're employing it in psychology, but it does not mean in the Christian spiritual sense. It means in the pure psychological sense of
yeah.
psyche, but not in the sense of spirit.
SubhanAllah,
Sorry
SubhanAllah.
to interrupt.
Oh no, Professor. We just want to listen. It's like I always say, it's like a baklava to the heart to listen to great scholars like you. It's sweetness to our minds and souls to understand psychology from your, mashallah, deep, profound insights and knowledge. Round of applause once more to Sheikh Professor Yasien. Thank you so much for giving out of your precious time. It was such an honor to learn from you. Brothers and sisters, please buy the book. Just go to whitethreadpress.com and buy this book. Support our scholars, our teachers, and their scholarly work. Inshallah, maybe we can do a halaqa with this book, inshallah, under the leadership of Professor Yasien. We want to thank Mufti Mangera and the White Thread Press for releasing this book. And I want to thank also all of our colleagues here today, Sister Nadira, Sister Shireen, Sister Fatima, Sister Dania, Sister Medea, and rest of our team in ISIP for always conducting all these great initiatives and doing all the work behind the scenes. And all of you, brothers and sisters, esteemed students, scholars, mental health professionals, thank you for asking all of your great questions. Please forgive me personally for any shortcomings, and all the good comes from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and all the mistakes are solidly mine. So thank you for your deep, profound questions, and please forgive us for not being able to answer all of them. Professor Yasien, we'll let you go now. Any final remarks before we conclude for today?
No, I just want to thank you for creating the platform for me to introduce the book. It's the first international launch. Alhamdulillah, I'm happy to share thoughts about the book. Thank you very much to you and to the ISIP team and to all the listeners. Shukran. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.
Alaikum salam wa rahmatullah. It was an honor to do this international.